Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Connor Moran. I am the director of the Wisconsin Book Festival. Thank you so much for being here to celebrate our 2021 fall celebration. It is an absolute pleasure to be welcoming Roya Hakakian for her book, A Beginner's Guide to America. We are joined as well by Michelle Good of Wisconsin Public Radio. Roya, Michelle, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much for having us. Me.
Absolutely. This is the second event of our fall celebration. We have two more events tonight. Coming up at 7, we have Carol Anderson for her new book, The Second. At 8:30, we have Miriam Taves for her book, Fight Night. I hope that you will join us for either of those events or for our virtual events all day tomorrow. And on Saturday, the 23rd, we will be hosting 12 in-person events at Madison Central Library to kind of celebrate coming back to events in person. So a little bit virtual, a little bit in person. We are making every effort to record those in-person events. So depending on where you are in vaccinations or comfort with being in public, we have options for you. I want to take this moment to thank Madison Public Library, the Madison Public Library Foundation, and all of our sponsors for really their overwhelmingly steadfast belief in free cultural events for Madison, for Wisconsin, for the country. And they have been unwavering in their support of these events. So thank you to all of them. And thank you for making it possible for us to host Roya for her book tonight. I'm going to take a step away. Michelle is our moderator, and Roya is our author. Thank you so much for being here. I will see you all at the end.
Hi, I'm going to take a couple of moments to tell you a little bit about Roya's background. Roya Hakakian fled Iran in 1984 and came to the United States as a refugee, eventually becoming a naturalized citizen. She studied poetry under the American poet and writer Allen Ginsberg at Brooklyn College while pursuing a degree in psychology. She came to critical attention as an author for her 2004 memoir, Journey from the Land of No. She was also awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship in 2008 to work on her second book, Assassins of the Turquoise Palace, which is a nonfiction account of the Mykonos restaurant assassination of Iranian opposition leaders in Berlin. She's contributed essays on Iranian issues for the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and NPR. And of course, her latest book is A Beginner's Guide to America for the Immigrant and the Curious. Roya, thank you so much for joining me this evening.
Thank you so much. I'm so delighted. I just wish we were in person.
I know. That would be delightful, but at least we get to talk virtually. I am very interested in the story of how you became a refugee.
Well, it was 1984, and I don't know, probably for those people who are as old as I am, they might remember that Iran underwent a major revolution in February of 1979. And as a result of that revolution, Iran's monarchy fell, and a new order came into being. Iran turned into a republic, although one can question the validity of the elections that have taken place. But the king was no longer in power, and Iran has had presidents since 1979 onward. But as a result of that revolution, so much changed for Iran, for the region, and I would argue for the world. And in September of 1980, Iran's neighbor to the south, Iraq, which was under the leadership of Saddam Hussein at the time, attacked Iran. And so a war began, which lasted for about 8 years. And it was one of the longest wars of the second half of the 20th century, with some of the most casualties on both sides. And by 1984, it looked very much like things were only getting worse. It was 4 years into the war. I was born and raised in the Jewish community in Iran, and a lot of the privileges that the Jewish community and other religious minorities had enjoyed, or I shouldn't say privileges, I should say rights, equal
Right.
rights, had been rescinded, and all religious minorities, Christians, Jews, especially the Baha'is, Zoroastrians, had somewhat become lesser citizens. I don't want to say entirely second-class citizens, but for sure lesser citizens, especially the Baha'i minority. And between the loss of rights, a war that was in its fourth year, and the growing repression, it looked like there was no other choice for my family than to leave Iran. And that's how my mother and I eventually left, landed in Europe, kind of made our way through various countries until we ended up in Austria, applied for asylum, and about a year later, we came to the United States.
And
That
you
was a
were
very
you were pretty young. I mean, you like 18 years old?
yeah, 18 and angry. 18, 18 and grief-stricken. And I think some of what probably comes through in the book is the anger and the grief of the 18-year-old plus the wit and the innocence of the 50-plus-year-old. And so between these two characteristics, the book has turned into what it has turned into.
Well, let's talk more about the book. I think the format itself, you could have easily written a memoir, although you did write a memoir in 2004.
Exactly.
But you could have taken the approach with this book as more of a memoir, and yet you chose to do it as a guide, which I don't know, for me personally, that was the first thing that appealed to me about it. Was I'm a big fan of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Universe. And for some reason, when I saw the title, it triggered in me all of the feelings of that book. I was like, it's going to be clever, it's going to be sassy, it's going to be informative, and it really lived up to it. Plus, I think it's kind of a genius concept on your part, because you get to add in the flavors of so many different immigrant groups. It isn't just your immigration experience, refugee experience, but you touch on almost any group that has come to this country as immigrants. You kind of touch on what the experience is like for each of them. Talk more a little about this guide format. I love it. I especially love this, how it's like serious, and then you throw in something that just made me laugh out loud.
Well, we're recording this, right? Because I want to
Yeah.
listen to this on my days, when I need something to lift me. Thank you, because everything you just said went to major, the boldest decisions I've ever made as a writer. Because with my first book, I was transitioning from writing in Persian into English. All I was trying to do was to pass, was to sound like I could pull it off. And I remember being insanely nervous that, somebody would come through and say, how dare you, use our language to write in, you're an outsider. And I know how silly that sounds, but, I knew in my head, I had the right. In my heart, I was not confident. I was anxious, and so that was the first book. And with my second book, everybody who had loved the first book, including my publisher, said, well, you're clearly a memoirist, so why don't you write a second memoir? And I said, what a death sentence that I am going to have to write about myself for the rest of my life. And in fact, even the first book is, even though it's a memoir, is hardly about me really, because all I'm trying to do is observe the transformation of Iran in that first book through the eyes of a young girl. With the third book, for the first time, I decided I'm not anxious, I'm not nervous anymore, and I have established the fact that I'm not a memoirist because my second book was told in a third person journalistic narrative all the way through, and I pulled that off. So this time I decided I will let this one be anything I want it to be. And I will dare to do whatever it is that I want. And so between that in the back of my head and then the idea that we kept hearing in 2016 that we shouldn't allow refugees, and then some refugees are better than others, right? We were hearing that we should have more Norwegians and less Africans, or
Right.
we should ban people from Muslim nations, and Iran was among the banned nations, and we should let those other ones in. And I was really stunned by several things. Number one, that there were these preferences that they thought, some immigrants had over others, because in my experience, those first few years, I was nothing but a nameless, faceless refugee. That nothing of the past that I had lived, nothing of everything that had made me the individual that I had been before really mattered, because once I didn't know how to speak proper English, or even find the proper bus to my home. I mean, on some days all I was trying to do was not get on the wrong subway to get home, just figure out which one goes south and which one goes north, and that was really my only challenge. And I thought, anybody who thinks that some immigrants are preferable to others, and I'm sure there are. I'm sure immigrants who come from Western nations have who speak English. The British, I don't know, the others in other Western nations that are more comfortable, or have grown up with English, have an easier time. But at the same time, I think there is a way in which this sort of being uprooted and making the transcontinental journey makes all of us, at least initially, jarred in the same ways. And all I was trying to do was to convey that to readers, that however different we might be, those initial years make us all the same, as if you walk into a baby ward in the hospital and say, which one is my kid, because we all kind of are alike in those early stages, because we are having those similar experiences, trying to master the language, trying to master our space, trying to figure out the culture, trying to fit in. Some of us come with more resources than others, but what I really wanted to emphasize was that the overlapping experiences and feelings and thoughts are far more in common than are the differences. And that's all I was trying to do. And some people keep saying, not all immigrants are the same. Of course, not all immigrants are the same, but there are ways in which, in those early weeks and months, most of us who do not share this Western, upbringing, encounter the same emotional, intellectual experiences, and that's what I was trying to capture in the book.
And I like too how that the first part one, which is the part that I read on chapter,
Yes.
um, really looks at literally from you are on the plane coming into the United States, and these are the thoughts you're going to have while you're filling out the forms
Yeah.
coming into it definitely takes on that guide form, especially in the beginning. And I love, and I mean, yes, you are definitely acclimating the immigrant or the refugee to this country, but it's the curious part that I like as well, because that's where, as a United States citizen, native born United States citizen, I get the benefit of seeing the United States through your eyes and through the eyes of other immigrants, and is also seeing our immigration system through your eyes. I think one of the things that really I never took into account before, but really opened my eyes to, was the story of Vladimir and Marina, which may have been, they were fictional names, but the path they're going through is a very real path. Tell us about that sort of like requirement that you have to get a job, and that doesn't really work for everyone.
No, no. I mean, you really nail it on the head. I mean, I was trying because there was so much that was being said about, immigrants, and then there was this bitter moment, and not that it has ended, where it seemed like all we were trying to do was go at each other on the issue of immigration. And you know on one hand, some of us were building walls, and on the other hand, we were, some of us were thinking, "Hey, everybody should come in, we should let everybody in." And I thought, I really was with neither side. I felt very strongly that I should contribute to this debate, but in a way that I wouldn't I wouldn't fall into either one of these camps, because I didn't belong to either one of these camps. I actually was at one point the subject of this debate, and I thought, if I don't want to add to the hostility and the ongoing bitterness, what could I do? And I thought, all I have to do is capture a very little of everything I had experienced and everything I have seen or read others like me had experienced, which overlapped with my own experience, or which overlapped with the experience of most of us who had come as brand new immigrants. And I thought, if I can bring people very close to that thought, those fears, those early excitements, those early joys, but mostly those early griefs, that and make the immigrant accessible, that I've done my job, because the immigrant was failing to be human in all that fighting that was going on. And I thought, all I want to do was to make the immigrant be human again. And so in the process, I thought, as you say, I reveal the America we experience to the curious, to those non-immigrant Americans. And I thought, you know, eh, eh, silly all the people who think that they should worry that the immigrant is a criminal, because we undergo such vetting, that I know of no non-immigrant American who would be willing to put up with it. Between the medical trials and the testing and the, vetting and the applications and the, background checks and this
And the
check.
work requirements too.
And then after we enter, then the refugees have work requirements. So
Yeah.
you come into this country, and the first job that I got, it was a week after I had arrived. I was still jet lagged, and I spoke no English. Was to answer the phone denture making company. And they thought just because I was 19 and I looked, like I was sane and smart or whatever, that I could, pick up the phone and
Could field phone call. Yes.
exactly. So it was 1 week after I'd come. It had taken me half a day to find the office. It just was really difficult for me to get around, especially in Manhattan, New York. And and I got there and they said, it's very simple. And I'm not saying I understood what they said, but I had been told what it was that I had to do. So you just have to answer these calls. And people would call me, would call, and I would pick up the phone and say hello, and they would say, "It's Bob. Can I talk to Jack?" And I would say, "Can you spell?" And the guy on the other side would go, "B-O-B." And then I would say, "Can you repeat?" And he would say, "B-O-B. What's wrong with you? Give me the Jack." And I would hang up. And then
Oh dear.
somebody else would call, because I didn't know, even if I got Bob, I would never get Jack. So that went on for about 2 or 3 days, and by Friday I was fired. But this is just to answer your question that, nobody, within this system of refugee, resettlement process, nobody makes allowances for, or at least not then. One of the things that I keep trying to do when when I'm invited to speak to refugee resettlement groups is to say, just give them a few weeks for God's sake, and that's what refugees really don't get. They're expected to go to work immediately and do whatever it is that they've been handed, regardless of skills, regardless of life plans or anything else, which makes the whole process really just gut-wrenching in so many ways.
Yeah, it really amazed me how it isn't taken into account people's experiences or skill set at all. And it's like 6 weeks, I think, between the time you arrive and on top of that, you also mention, which was also very enlightening, the complex level of emotions that people are. I mean, of course, if you think about it, people are going to be homesick. Of course, if you think about it, there may be some resentment, but I don't think that's one of the foremost emotions that people are thinking that refugees or immigrants might have when they come. It's more of a, oh yes, when they're unpacking their suitcase, they might think, oh, I miss my home. But there is that, I didn't want to leave my home. I was forced to leave my home. And there's bitterness, there's resentment, even, not towards the people who are offering you shelter, but the fact that they think you should just be happy that you're there and it's over with. And it's sort of like, but I never should have had to leave to begin with. That's what I think is the harder thing for a non-refugee to understand is yes, there's relief, there's gratefulness, there's happiness at being in this safe place, but there's this whole other layer of such complex emotions. Can you speak a little to that?
Yeah. I mean, you said it more eloquently than I ever could, but yes, the idea that I mean, I was the one who had fled Iran. I was the one, who had stood in, rationing lines, right? There was a war going on between Iran and Iraq, and Iran was under sanctions, and the war had created so many shortages. And so I was the one, with my mom, to stand in line for eggs, for nylon stockings, for everything you can imagine under the sun, day after day. So it isn't that I wasn't aware of why we had to leave and how much we didn't have and why, life just couldn't go on the way it was. But at the same time, every time somebody asked me where I was from, and I told them, and they said, "You must be delighted to be here," I felt profoundly offended. And it wasn't because, I wasn't grateful to be in America. It was because I was ungrateful that they wouldn't understand, or clearly didn't understand, that no one wants to be uprooted, no matter how bad their circumstances are. And the first thing to say to an uprooted immigrant or refugee, the last thing you want to say is, "You must be delighted." The delight, as you probably have seen in the book, comes a lot later, but in those early days and years, it isn't delight. It's just disorientation. It's grief. It's great loss that just gets compounded every time you're lost on the street, every time someone asks you a question and you can't answer. So yes, I mean, on the other hand, when I think about it, uh, people were trying to be kind. Nobody said you must be delighted because they were trying to be cruel. People were trying to make conversation, but I think at the heart of it was one fundamental idea, that they all thought, "Look how generous we are. We let you in. So, be grateful and be joyous." And I became all those things eventually, but that wasn't what I wanted to hear, or how I wanted to be received, in those early years.
That completely makes me think of, um, we've been talking about it, and it sounds like it's such a serious book, and it is a serious book in a lot of the concepts it deals with, but it's so littered with humor.
Yes.
So many things.
And
that
you're
are
right. I
funny.
did take inspiration from a Guide to the Galaxy.
Did you?
Yes,
Oh,
yes,
that's fascinating.
because it is one of the most hilarious books that I've ever read, and I thought, he was doing so much in that book, and I thought, what could I do? And so, and of course, another thing that books makes clear is that you can do anything you want, and that's what I really decided I would do. Anything I want. Yeah.
I love some of your comments about just Americans and America in general, where it's your first meeting with your landlord, or the immigrants meeting, where I'll automatically want to assume everything is you.
Yeah.
But the first meeting with the landlord and the discussion, it's just hysterical how you describe him. You use sort of every adjective for extra large that you can imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all get used to our sizes, but the first thing that struck me when the airport doors opened was that I have never seen a landscape this open and vast. I mean, I hadn't even gone into the city yet. I was, just, the John F. Kennedy Airport doors open, and I saw the sky, and I thought, and this overlapping layers of highway. I'd never seen anything like that. And so I think we part of the book's effort was to show how much disorientation there is to just take in. I have a friend who came to the who's in her 30s, and she came to the United States 7-8 years ago, and she's an artist. She's a painter. She came to an MFA program in the US. And I said, tell me about, what your experience was when you arrived. And she said, I was in a fog for many months. And I said, how so? She said, they took me, the school where she was studying art in the United States, took her and her class to Home Depot to purchase, stuff they need to build things. And she said that it was one of the most depressing things that she had ever seen. And I said, why? And she said, because I had never seen so much material in one place that you could actually just simply purchase. And that would have changed my life, back where I was, if I had ever even been able to think that these sizes, these proportions could ever be possible. So she actually came out of Home Depot thoroughly depressed for many, many days. until I think, she actually put something together with the material that she'd never done, in a size that she had never been able to produce, and that kind of helped her snap out of it.
You have to take her to Costco and see what
and we do walk through the aisles of Costco in the book, right?
Well, it's true.
Right.
I was actually in the grocery store today, and I, knowing I was going to see you later, but I had to buy cat food. And I thought, I wonder if Roya has a pet by this point in her life. And I saw they had little sweaters, and I was like, oh yeah, what people must think of us the first time they walk into a supermarket. Do you have a pet now?
I have a dog. We had a cat that died, but we have a little dog. But that little error that I talk about in the book about, you as an immigrant may walk through the aisles and see very cheap beef, be careful because it's not human food. I made that mistake. I was we had very little money, or I should say we were running fast out of money when we were in Europe. And my mother said, here's, whatever amount of money, that here's a bill, go get something for us to eat. And I went to the supermarket and I got to this aisle that had food much cheaper than elsewhere throughout the supermarket. And I thought, oh, these cans are wonderful, and I loaded them in the cart. And, then I started walking and I saw that they all had very cute dogs and cats on them. And by the end of the aisle, it dawned on me that, then I saw the leashes, and the other things. And I realized that these people can actually, they have such full lives that they can actually tend to their pets in such a way that they have factories that produce pet foods. And that was something else I had never seen in my life when, I first got to Europe. So that little passage about pet food was, in fact, a memoir piece.
Really one of yours.
Yes.
Yeah, I was wondering if the obsession of Americans, something else that really jumped out at me was our obsession with happiness. Because I'm very much, I remember as a kid, I don't know what it's like in Iran, but in America, we always say to the little kids, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Right.
Always ask them that. And I used to always say, I want to be happy when I grow up. And so I found that very interesting because I was like, I wonder, and I had never made that equation with, the pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I had never put that in with the Bill of Rights kind of correlation. But then, of course, after reading it, I was like, oh my gosh, you're right. And the holidays too, rather than celebrate Martin Luther King's death, we celebrate Martin Luther King's birth. It's all geared towards keeping the population happy.
Yeah, I mean, of course, my emphasis more than happiness, or at least, in with that Martin Luther King example, was to say that we in this country emphasize life, and that is not, in fact, how it's done elsewhere. I come from a country and a region that is steeped in death, all the time. That in fact, the 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 relationship that is most fostered through a variety of ways between the citizens and the world outside, the material world, is a metaphysical one. That you are always encouraged to not create attachments with the material world, whether that's done through religion, religious teaching, or just cultural or traditional teaching, or that in some ways it actually serves the purposes of authoritarian rulers. Because, if you're not a citizen who has deep attachments to the material world, who has deep attachment to a home, a business, belongings, whether they are, I don't know, a pool in your backyard, or a collection of stamps or anything, right? If you don't develop material attachments, then you are more readily inclined to first of all put up with various shortages. Say in North Korea, there are shortages, and therefore, if the culture probably, or the leadership probably keep telling the citizenry that you don't need all these things. A human being, a good citizen, all a good citizen needs is a few things, and a resolute soul that is willing to sacrifice for X, Y, and Z. So authoritarian regimes don't actually support or want the people to have strong attachments, because it doesn't serve them. Because if they have strong material attachments, then they have expectations too. Then they want better lives. They want better homes. They want bigger refrigerators. They want prettier cars. They want all sorts of things that authoritarian regimes oftentimes don't provide. So it's a whole other way of living when you're being told that creating material attachments is a bad thing that you ought not to do. And what's very exceptional in some ways about being in America is that the opposite keeps happening. I mean, look, we have we have appointed or assigned 9/11 to be a national day of service. It could have easily been a national day of mourning, but that's not what it is. It's a national day of service. It's a day that we are expected to, of course, remember, but also serve the country, do something for the country. And these are all the things that that I think the non-immigrant American, assumes is done everywhere, but it almost is not done anywhere outside of this country. And I thought, let me take the non-immigrant to this journey of looking at the America that the immigrant sees, to see all the ways in which America is a very different place than most other places in the world. And one of those ways was to show that we are designed, we are expected to be attached to life to live. And that is very different from so many other cultures where, where death days are marked, and every occasion of national tragedy is marked with more displays of tragedy, as opposed to celebrating life and so on.
I also think it's you get into aspects of, which for me was a nice wake up call. You talk about, basically it's apathy, how to a certain extent Americans, native born Americans, take advantage of or take for granted the rights that were given in a way that, like an immigrant, well, immigrants are more familiar with the rights, especially if they've become nationalized, because they study them at a much deeper level than native born Americans do in schools.
Mm-hmm.
But also the treasure of them, the fact that, like you were saying, in these other countries, so many times we take it for granted because we're born with it. We're born with the ability to speak our minds, to say, I have these rights and you can't trample on them, even if I am trampling on your rights while I am talking about you trampling on my rights. We don't really understand them. And to a certain extent, it's kind of like, lately it's been the hot topic of privilege. There's sort of this American layer of privilege as well that native born Americans don't even realize that they're taking advantage of, just by living their daily lives.
Yes, precisely. What a good way of defining it. I didn't think about it in those terms, but yes. So within our American society, we have layers of privilege, but as a whole, we all have privileges if you compare us, or if you place us in the context of the rest of the world. And that, what I was trying to do in the book, to say whatever it is that some of us feel we lack when we compare ourselves to the others, and however it is that we wish to correct those shortcomings or injustices, which we should do, bear in mind that we also have a bigger context, a bigger framework in this world, which is us in the backdrop of the rest of the countries in the world. And in that context, we are the most privileged in many, many ways. A very, very basic elementary example is that most of my friends who come from the Middle East say that the first way in which they have been stunned is how the palette of their perspective, of just a view of the streets and landscape, has changed, because we come from dry places. We don't see water when we drive. It takes us hours, if not days, to get to a small piece of, whatever, lake or river or, sea, something we call beach, to see, that to have that perspective of water, or forest, or just woods. These things, just don't exist. And a friend of mine was saying, I was used to always having gray and brown and sandy colored palette in front of my eyes, and ever since I've come to America, it's all green and blue, and and my eyes are taking a long time to adjust. That's a gift, and I don't think we understand. And I remember in my first year of college, a boy took me out to dinner, and when we got out, he grabbed my hand, and I think he grabbed my hand. It looked like, I was about to slip, but then he held my hand, and the first reaction I had was to turn around and look to see whether there was a guard that was going to come after us, because I had come from Iran, and in Iran, no boy and girl who were not brother and sister or married could hold hands in public. They would be taken away, right? So the moment he did that, my first reaction was one of panic. So I turn around and he says, "What are you doing?" And I thought, "They're going to come and arrest us." And he said, "This is New York. Nobody's coming to arrest us." And so, these, and I explain some of this in the book. For a long time I was walking, and in the early months, and I had come from a country where the dress code of having a scarf or a veil on your head was mandatory. So I would walk around and I would go, and then I'd realize, oh, I didn't have to pull anything because there is nothing on my head, because I don't have to do that. But it took a long time for this tick, just physical tick of pulling the scarf over, to my eyebrows, to stop. So these are all the privileges of living a life that has had so many other rights. It needs to have more, and it needs to get closer
Yes.
to equality, but still rights that most other people in the world do not have.
We have a couple questions from the audience. I'm going to read one of them to you. What was your greatest culture shock when you came to the US? Which, if they read the book, they will find a lot of them. But what was the greatest?
I think, because I had come from Iran, and I had been a teenage girl without any teenage girl privileges. My greatest culture shock was when my sister-in-law took me in that first week to a clothing store, and I saw lacy tops and pink mini skirts with sequins. I mean, colors and styles and things I had never seen in my life. And I, nor could I ever, wear them, even if I had access to them, because it just wasn't, there was no space in the society where I was born and raised. So, I mean, I looked at the racks, and the first thought was, in my mind, oh my God, this is what my teenage years should have been. These are the colors I never got a chance to put on. These are the styles I never saw. These are the fabrics I missed out on. And then I thought, and I didn't buy anything, because I just, it was too overwhelming. And we walked out, and I think we went back many days later until I was ready to, pick up a couple of things.
Did you get that pink mini skirt?
No. I've never been able to do that. Not still.
So another question is, the book is written as a direct address and it employs the you voice. How did you make the decision to write in this style, and how did it frame what you wrote about and how you wrote about it?
Okay, well, part of it was because I mean, here's a confession. I had read a lot of really beautiful you books for about a year. Letter styled books, epistolary prose that I had really become enamored with. But the most important thing I wanted to do was to add my voice to the conversation about immigrants without falling on the left or the right, without people saying, oh, she's pro or she's anti. And I thought, well, it can't be a memoir because then it would be dismissed as just one person's account. And it can't sound like another piece of journalism in third person, because it would sound like, a newspaper article or, something detached. So I thought, what's another choice where, you know, I don't, it will not be a personal narrative or a detached narrative. And then I thought a second person address would would create a completely different voice that hopefully will get people to listen more. Although I've had a couple of friends who've said that it was very annoying. So I don't know. Some people say that it drew them in instantly, and a couple of people have said it was very annoying and got on my nerves. So we'll see. What was your experience?
From a reader's perspective,
Yeah.
from somebody reading it out loud,
Yeah.
I think the you voice was very helpful for me as a reader. I actually approached it. I tried to think of myself like Siri to a certain extent. You know what I mean? Pleasant, informative, and helpful. But Siri kind of gone wild, so that occasionally, I could be sassy and comment a little more on things. But yeah, I kind of looked at it as from a reading it out loud perspective, as like, my job is to be your guide, your pleasant, happy,
Right. That's
pleasant, happy guide. So, and as I said, I love that format from the Hitchhiker's Guide. So for me personally, it was definitely a draw.
Oh, good. I'm glad. And I like sassy. You keep calling it sassy. I love that.
So another question is, Wisconsin has tried to welcome many Afghan refugees recently with army barracks, housing, and clothing drives. What do you think they need most?
Ears, people who just listen, people who, and if they can't speak English, people who just take them on walks without expecting them to perform, or be grateful or ungrateful, or because a new immigrant is put through so much. I had to take ESL classes. I had to immediately start working. I had to sit in the social security lines because I needed to get the card. I needed to go be taken to the bank. I needed to start a new account. I needed to register for college. There was so much bureaucracy that I was getting through all the time because I had to, because that's how life had to get started. And I don't remember having really just downtime, time to not have to perform or do anything. So um, I think it probably would be very pleasant to go for a walk where people don't come to take you on on a ride to the school, or to pick up supplies, or do a job interview, because that's what we're expected to do. And I think probably it would be wonderful to just be with them, without having to worry about the chores that need to get done.
That's a lovely idea. So another of our participants says, I love the lines, anything you never dared to imagine is imaginable. But first and foremost, you must learn to imagine. Is this only applicable for you in the relationships section, or is this a thread through the entire American experience?
It's a threat in the entire American experience. Again, it's very one of the things, I don't know how many people are following the news from Afghanistan now that it came up. Excuse me. But female judges have been removed. Women have been removed from court system, and soon they will be removed from any sort of legal positions. So women attorneys are going to be out of jobs, not only in courts but everywhere in Afghanistan, because that's precisely what happened in Iran, and that's I see that scenario unfolding in Afghanistan, and so it's very hard for people in this country to imagine such realities are possible. Realities that close large swaths of professions that you may have wanted to perform in, to do. Or in my case, growing up as an adolescent in Iran, large swaths of colors that just didn't exist, at least not for a girl in public. There was no pink that you could put on. There was no red that you could put on. You would get arrested with, a pink uniform or a pink veil outside of your home. So of course, if all of these things are banned, then you are basically growing in allowing yourself to grow within the boundaries of what you've been allotted or allowed to do. And so coming here, part of what one has to begin to do is to begin to imagine that colors are possible, professions are possible, or at least if you have to struggle, the struggles are not the struggles of the past, they're the struggles of a new present. And that makes life entirely different. The struggles that maybe, that you have to take your LSAT exams or whatever else, but it won't be because those doors are closed. And I think therefore learning to imagine becomes a big part of what one begins to do in this country.
So we have one last question. What are a few of your favorite things about Iranian culture that you wish people knew?
Oh, so many things. I still think something beautiful that I so much miss is that, culturally, we had poetry night gatherings. My parents and their peers got together, once a month in the evenings, made dinner, but they got together to recite poetry. Here people get together to watch Super Bowl or, do that sort of thing. Or just do barbecue and hang, so to speak. My parents, even after they came to the United States, regularly got together with their friends once a month and recited poetry. It was unbelievable, and it was so beautiful. And that's one of the most important things that I miss, in addition to so much else, that poetry was so much part of life, but also part of a public conversation.
That's lovely. Did you, this would be kind of on the spot, but do you have one of your poems that you could recite for us very briefly?
I would have to go look. I wish I knew in advance. I would have prepared something.
No, and I just kind of thought of it, but I don't want to inconvenience you. So let's not worry about that. Thank you so much for joining me today. This has been just a wonderful conversation. And I wanted you and the people who are listening on Comcast, streaming on Comcast, to know that we will be reading the second part of your book on chapter day, the week of Thanksgiving. So if people want to listen to that, they can go to chapteraday.org.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this. Thank you, Michelle.
I did too. It was fun.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Roya, Michelle. What a wonderful conversation. Thank you for your thoughtful questions, Michelle, and Roya for your answers. This was an incredible hour. I can't believe how quickly it went by. I hope that one day we are able to bring you here to Madison. I'm sure there will be more books and more opportunities, so please keep writing them and we'll keep inviting you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone watching at home, and we will be back at 7 with Carol Anderson. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.